Thank you very much for joining me this presentation. This is quite an ambitious little presentation. I have to go through 10 ways to use the client-side API within my 30 minutes. So let's get going with that. Now, first of all, I should explain that the API really is fantastic because it allows you to control just about anything that you want to do inside the screen. It's a specialized set of code libraries to really make this something very easy to do. So if I step on again, I'm going to show you here where you can control all aspects of the screen. You can see that you can control the browser tabs. You can also add in hyperlinking on data. The example that I might be able to show you a little bit later on is where you can put in a hyperlink to an external data source. It happens to be there doing an automatic Google search, but it could equally be a link out to, say, Companies House for corporate information. We can have a look as well at changing the properties of fields. So any field changes, color, dimensions, all aspects of style can be changed. And it's not just fields. We have control of lists, columns, rows, individual cells can be controlled based on whatever data that they can contain. And we can even control the way in which data is entered into the system, so we can change the formatting of data. And here you can see that what I've started to do, that I've started to enter some data into a field, and I'm required to enter the data in mixed case. If I'd entered it with accidentally caps lock switched on, or I'd forgotten to use uppercase at all for the first letter, then the idea is that the rule could change it. And I can also do things like validate data as well. You can see here that I've used the API to control the availability of a button. I can't save this data because that telephone number that you can see on the screen is invalid. I can also visually transform data, and the API gives you complete control over the elements of the user interface. So I can decide to transform data visually by perhaps calling a graph. I could use Google's charting interface. I could use the inbuilt Fusion charts, or here I'm just swapping out and saying that I want to display a field as a GIF to whatever the information that I want. Now, I can also fetch data wherever I need it. This happens to be using this very simple Ajax example. It doesn't have to be on screen to be available to the API. The API makes use of, this is an asynchronous fetch. I've grabbed details of the company table, which are not normally included at the level of the opportunity. You can see I'm looking at my opportunity screen. Now, the thing is that the client-side API has full access to the DOM, the document object model. The document object model is the way in which the browser understands the components that make up the page that it loads in. So the HTML is structured in a way that is addressable by code, and you've got full access to that within the API. And we can look at any data that's in the browser, and that's everything from the values within the URL to the text and the captions and the data on the screen, whether they are hidden fields or not. And importantly, as that last one that I showed you, where you can fetch the data from within inside the system, the client server API allows server-side data to be fetched using the REST API. Perform any Ajax task, and that's where Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That's where you can be in a screen, you can request something again to the server within the page without having to reload the entire page. So you can fetch that. Now, there is a so what in this, in that so what? Surely everything I've shown you so far can be done using plain old JavaScript. Why do I need a specialized API for this? And whether in fact do I need a specialized API? Well, it is all really about what advantage that the API gives. Consider this screen. This is what you can see here is a lead summary screen, and the API simplifies everything. The API is not only a specialized code library, it's a simplified code library. And I have a look back on this screen again. You can see that it's assigned to Fred Jones. So this lead is assigned to Fred Jones. And you can see that I'm viewing this lead with the user Susan May. And you can see that the browser tab is labeled. Now, you can also see that there is a button called Convert to Opportunity. And the business rule that I want to implement here is, how can I hide this button so that only the owner of the lead sees this button and so has the right to convert this to an opportunity when the lead is ripe? Well, this is what it would look like in plain old JavaScript. So this is plain old JavaScript that would hide the button in the lead summary when the current user is not the assigned user for the lead. Now, this happens to be a script that could be added into the screen by a system administrator. Inside the screens, there's a customize area in the admin section for each Sage CRM screen, and it's something called the custom content box, which allows code like this to be added into the screen. Now, one of the traditional challenges of working with different browsers has been to ensure that the code works on each version. So imagine you're having to write and take into account that you're working with potentially, most people will be using Chrome, then Firefox. There'll be some people who are still using Edge, and a very small number of people, even a very small number of people using Internet Explorer. Now that I've written here can be rewritten in the client-side API to that. The same job can be rewritten in the client-side API, and the client-side API takes care of worrying about which browser you're using. Now, we're able to do a lot of the work like this because the client-side API itself is built on another API called jQuery, and it's jQuery that takes care a lot of much of the browser independence code. So this rule is short and easy to read. It makes it easy to read the text of the fields displayed on the screen, and we've got access to common objects that we used to use that we could use in plain old JavaScript, like the current user object, and the API knows all about Sage CRM buttons, so we can select our button very easily and we can hide it. And so it's all very much easier using the client-side API. And this next slide actually shows how that actually is built up. So here you can see this is another way of looking at the script, and I've put the plain old JavaScript at the top, a jQuery version of it in the middle, and then the client-side API at the bottom. And you can see that it becomes the big jump is when we start using jQuery to reduce the amount of code that's having to be written. But it becomes much easier to understand what we're doing when we're using the client-side API. Now, another thing about this client-side API is that it's available everywhere. The thing about this is that it's a universal API. That means that it's available in every user interface screen, whether or not that screen is usually editable. Now, one of the limitations of client-side API plain old JavaScript is, how do I get the code into the screen? We're going to see in a little bit that the client-side API gives you a mechanism to ensure that every screen has this. Now, I've switched over into CRM again. I'm looking at an address, this time for a company. That's all built in HTML. I can look at any page inside Sage CRM, any page within a browser, and I can look at to see what its page source is. And you can see that I've loaded in the page source and I've highlighted an area. Now, this page includes some JavaScript functions that are defined locally. This one actually is starting to be the definition of the user object or the current user object. And this local script is defined, it's immediately available for whatever. But you can also see on the same page, in the same area, that there's a default extensive use made of external script file references. This is a script library, and this might well be the jQuery library that is being pulled in. You'll see that there's a reference to here at the top of every page saying script type equals text/JavaScript source, and then a path down to a JS file which contains the JavaScript. And all of the JavaScript used within the browsers, within the pages, actually within Sage CRM, is separated into different script libraries, and the same applies for our own client-side API. It's a set of JavaScript that simplifies the interface for us. And we can actually mix anything that's here with plain old JavaScript. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how you can extend the system with our own functions and script libraries. So in amongst the densely packed HTML, you can see here that there is actually a reference to the client-side API. And so the client-side API is a library of JavaScript functions that we can call to make our life easier when we're interacting with the Sage CRM user interface. Now let's see the next thing about the API, and that is that it's very, very easy to learn. And so we know that the client-side API is universal. We know that it's in every screen, and we know that we can get this into every screen, that whether it's editable or not. But its point is that it's very, very easy to start to play with and to get experience and get a sense of the power. Now, I've shown you this screen before. I want to show you how quickly we can now start to learn the API and see how easy it is to control things on the screen. So let's see. Imagine we want to be able to select fields using the client-side API. We can identify a single field. We can identify groups of fields, multiple fields. We can also say that we want to ensure that we select all fields except for, and we can even, there's even a shortcut way of referring to the name of a field without having to use the crm.fields mechanism. So if I want to select a field like address postcode, I can do this very, very easily. I'm going to be able to use this by demonstrating just the JavaScript console. So you get into the JavaScript console by hitting F12. So if you open up the console, you can now enter things directly into the console. This is a direct interaction with the page, and it's a very good way of experimenting with JavaScript without making any permanent change. And the point is that it's, as I just dropped something in, this is temporary. I'm not making any permanent changes to the screens. And you can see here that what I've done is I've copied in var my field equals crm.fields and then address postcode. So this code is grabbing hold of the postcode object. And once I've got the object, the API, now because it's CRM dot tells it that I'm accessing an object provided by the API, I can now start to control the properties of that field. And here I'm going to choose to highlight it. And you can see that I've highlighted the field. The effect is immediate. And I've just used highlights, but in fact that there are lots of different client-side APIs methods to control fields. There are lots of different ways in which we control any of the visual elements. The visibility of fields, notice that there are things like hide, collapse, show. So I can selectively simplify the interface by collapsing fields, hiding it away, doing anything that I want. Now, I mentioned we've been able to start to learn this, but the usage of it is very, very easy as well. So that's actually where we're starting to apply it very, very easily into the system. And this is a very simple script. This here, you can see that this is some code designed to be triggered on the person's surname field. It will warn if somebody enters this into uppercase. And it uses something called the info message method to write the message onto the screen. Now, to be able to do this, to actually be able to do this, what I have to do is go into the person box long screen inside the administration area, and I'm entering it into the onChange script. Now, the onChange script associated with a field will detect the user making a change on the data in the field on which it will fire. So if somebody changes the last name of a person, this will fire. And my person screen shows the additional my my screen here is showing the fields that we're editing, and if I click to change this, what you can see is that I can now type in the name all in uppercase, and if I do that, you can see that the last name has been entered into uppercase. So the data change has been detected and the rule has been triggered. Okay, so that's easy to be able to put in something with the API into an on-change script, for example, but it's also easy to embed into every screen. For example, why would I want to do this? Well, rather than simply telling a user that they've made a mistake, it could actually be better to change the data as they enter it. And if you're going to do that, you need to be able to use a function to be able to group the behavior together into the custom content so that it does the work that you want it to do. But it's simply more than one thing. It's several things that have to be worked out. Now, this is where we have to come into custom content. Custom content can be added into nearly every screen inside Sage CRM, and the custom content box then can contain the business rule that we want to write. Now I'm showing you this as a business rule function. This happens to be plain old JavaScript, but I'll build on this a little bit later on, because it's where we can start to reference and add in automatically script without having to use the custom content box. But the custom content box usefully can contain these types of functions defined in script tags. So this will arrive in the page as HTML, but it's defining it as JavaScript. So okay, and functions can be simple. And this is very much what we can do. We can add in the script into the custom content box, and you can see that I've changed my on-change script so that the person name field now references the new function, instead of having to write all of the behavior into the field itself. So this means now if I attempt to enter my name in uppercase, it's automatically corrected to the correct case. Just like plain old JavaScript, just like anything, any of the functions that we write using the client-side API can be added in, embedded into the system. But the point is that the API, client-side API, actually allows us to go a little bit further and easily control when we want scripts to fire. And consider this: when JavaScript, any script is loaded into an HTML page, JavaScript is always going to attempt to run or execute when it's loaded into the browser. And that's fine when the JavaScript is just defining a function that's going to be invoked later on. But if we're attempting to change the screen, we need to have a way of ensuring that the script doesn't fire until this page has finished loading. If you think about it, we can't want to try and address a field until that field has arrived on the screen and is ready to be controlled. So here you can see an example, and it's on screen now, as an example that uses the client-side API, the second one down, and the CRM ready method is allowing us to ensure that the script is executed when the page is fully loaded, so that all objects can be found and controlled. And this is actually binding the execution of the code to the completion of something called the onload event. And because it's attached to the onload event, it means that we can now access any data or objects that have been loaded into the window. And we can show you this a little bit more sophisticated method. This happens to be a function that could be used in the company summary screen, and the idea here is that it's going to change the color of the field of company status, comp status, depending on the value that field contains. Now, we know how to select a field in the client-side API, so we know how that we can grab the value of the field. This one, it happens to be using a switch statement rather than an if statement. So it's a form of conditional statement. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, there are some lessons on the Sage CRM, there are some lessons on the Sage support and training website, YouTube channel that covers that will cover the use of simple JavaScript. So this is standard JavaScript JavaScript syntax, and it's something more efficient than a nest of if statements. Now you can see that what I can do is I can add this into my company box long, and here that the use of the ready method means it will only work once the page is fully loaded. And that's why we can see it happening here. You can see that the highlight is making the change in the status very noticeable to the user. Now, I've talked about this use of the custom content box, but actually there is a problem with custom content boxes. And this is where the Sage CRM API, the client-side API, actually starts to become really, really useful because it's so easy to reuse code. Now, the trouble is that code entered into one custom content box is only available in that screen. If you want code to be used in more than one screen, then you need to be able to consider using a script library. And here you can see now rules need to be shared across screens. You can see I've got some example here of a script showing how the script tag can have a source associated with this. And we can take advantage of the ability of an HTML script tag to use this source parameter. And that allows us to hold all of our business rules in an external file and load the same business rules into each screen when we need them. So I can change the HTML and the custom content of the field so that it reads like this. So I can reference my field rather than actually having a custom content containing it. Now that's a plain old JavaScript technique. You can use that, but the point is that the client-side API uses that technique but actually puts it onto steroids. It becomes even more powerful. Now, right at the beginning of the lesson, I showed you the HTML of the page. I pointed out that the page includes some JavaScript functions that are defined locally, but actually the default system, in the default system, extensive use is made of external script file references. And this is where I was pointing out where you can go into the source and then down to the path, and here it's I'm looking at the jQuery library that is being used, but we can add actually our own JavaScript libraries automatically into every single page of the interface, and you do this by creating your own JavaScript file. And here it is. I've created a JavaScript file. You can see that the script file is using the idea of the CRM ready method to only process the code when the page has been loaded in. You can see I'm using another method called getArgs to allow me to examine the context in which the action code, and which is the code that allows me to work out which screen I'm in, has been loaded into Sage CRM. So action code 200, you can see there in the act equivalent to 200, means that I'm looking for a screen that is the company summary screen. This code is stored as a script file, and it's stored down in a folder. You can see the root there, you can see the path there, I should say, and you can see it's down under C program files, Sage CRM, whatever your install name is, www.root/js/custom. So this is a fantastic trick. The idea is that you can create your own JS file, add them into the custom folder, and it will then load in. You can see here I happen to have one that is called Sage CRM training there that is being loaded in. We can ensure that it's loaded into every page. We don't have to add our own code into the custom content now. It's available in every page. And these files that we write, these library files, are very easy to structure to be able to create sensible structures with this. Now, if we look here, you can see that I've got a line at the top of the code, and it says var company rules equals company rules, and then I've got an or and then I've got the shortcut to create an object. So this is either going to create a new object, or it's going to return an existing one. And the point is here, I'm creating a sort of virtual namespace for coding. So I can essentially create a namespace, and I can use my own objects within this to organize code and avoid clashes with existing objects and functions. Consider this. If I'm changing the HTML in a page, I need to understand about mode. This is starting to think about mode, actually, this one. The code looks at adding in a Google search hyperlink into the company name. Again, this could have been another type of behavior that I wanted to include, but I'm adding in a hyperlink to this field. If the company name is grabbed from the interface, and here you can see the variable I'm using is fcomp name, there's a method here that allows me to work out whether that field is in edit mode or view mode. You can see where I'm using get mode. Now, this is only going to make sure that I'm going to make the change within the right frame, if you like, of when the page is being used. So I can now I can go in and actually start to show that the page is only, the hyperlink is only appearing in view mode. So in edit mode, there's going to be no change to the behavior of the fields. You can see that there's no hyperlinking there on that data. And that allows us to control exactly when we want certain behavior to take place. Let's think about what else about another useful thing about the API, and that is that it's fully referenced. It is absolutely, completely and utterly referenced. We can go into the help center and we can look down and we can see their reference to the client-side help, and we can view that online. The API is also covered by the SDK. And when you download that from the community, you'll be able to see that you can be writing your own script files, and you'll be able to access the client-side API, all of the mechanisms to allow you to create things like buttons, for example.